Oh, hello folks, this is Steve AB4. You may hear the traffic going by. I got the window open. It's getting on toward 9 o'clock and it's cooling off pretty nicely. So anyway, recently I put up an episode where I say the websites that don't like your ad blocker, I don't know what they're talking about. They'll let you click to go buy it because they know that if you keep kicking them maybe you won't come back ever. But Associated Press hasn't gotten to that point of smartness yet. Sometimes you can get them, they'll do it like once or twice, but this one it's permanent. So I was going to just see what the world news was. So the alternative was, I'm not promoting anything, I'm not recommending anything. Reuters. And it's all the usual propaganda that all one-sided. Spy cockroaches and AI robots. Germany plots the future of warfare. Now they're showing cockroaches with some kind of electronics on their back. I don't know how good the search engine is now, but I bet you I could find an article and stuff about exactly that over 10 years ago. There's no such thing as new ideas. There's only people who think they're geniuses. But at least Reuters will let me see the headlines. So I was getting down here. Now my mind's going to wander. Here it is. Rising seas and shifting sands attack Alexandria. And they don't mean Alexandria, Virginia. They mean Alexandria, Egypt. Now, I think sometimes the people who write these things are not human. I thought I was going to make this bigger, but apparently not. So this picture is by Mohammed Abd El Ghani. And it looks like a drone picture, so drones have arrived in Egypt. And just to once again bore you, in 1966 I hitchhiked across North Africa, and in the second half of the journey from Middle Tunisia to Alexandria, Egypt, I rode with a Land Rover sales group led by Colonel LeBlanc. Oh, I've been to Alexandria, Egypt? So why would a story like this attract me, aside from the fact that I've been there? The most recent incident will be right down at the North Carolina DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles office 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I don't remember. I went in to renew my license because they needed to take a new photo of me. And the gal who helped me and kind of snookered me because I asked her, is your family from Mexico? And she led me on. Because I told her I had worked in Mexico, and so finally she said, I'm Egyptian. I said, really? Where in Egypt? She said, Alexandria. And I said, I was in Alexandria in 1966. I'm in the Piedmont of North Carolina, and I meet somebody from Alexandria, Egypt, and I've been there. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. During that period of time, when I lived in Philadelphia and then I left and I did that journey, I had a good friend in Philadelphia who was attending Philadelphia Textile College. That's what it was called. That doesn't exist anymore. It merged in Philadelphia Textile College. He was from Venezuela. You go, oh, what's that got to do with Alexandria? He's Egyptian born, a Jew born in Alexandria, Egypt. How many people do you know that were born in Alexandria, Egypt? I'm already up to 2. When I was on Kibbutz Ein Shemer in Israel in 1974, there was an older guy there that I worked with in the Pardes. That's the citrus orchard. He was born in, grew up in, and was a merchant in Alexandria, Egypt, before he immigrated to Israel. So that's 3. Does that happen in your life? Now, in a sense, I want to comment on something that the way this was written. Rising seas and shifting sands attack Alexandria. Alexandria is a coastal city on the west side of the Nile Delta. What's a city on the east side of the Nile Delta? Quick! Port Said. What else is on the east side of the Nile Delta? Quick! Suez Canal. The storied Egyptian settlement that survived everything from, now listen to the timeline, that survived everything from bombardment by the British in the 1880s Did Napoleon conquer Alexandria? That's a question. 2 crusaders in 1160s, now to succumbing to a subtler foe infiltrating its foundations. Why was Alexandria, what statue, let's see if I get it right. What statue was in Alexandria, Egypt? AI overview. In Alexandria, Egypt, a prominent statue was that of Alexander the Great. Who was he? A Greek. How wide was his conquest? Well, wait a minute. We're going to find out why it's called Alexandria. In Alexandria, Egypt, a prominent statue was that of Alexander the Great, a Greek who founded the city in 331 BC. There's also a large statue of the Nile god Hapi, originally located in the now submerged city of Theonis Herslion. You notice that name is Greek, not Arabic. Oh, you mean Arabic never? What language did they speak in Egypt after Alexandria was there? What language did the famous queen speak, actually? And her bloodline, was it Egyptian or was it Greek? Now, Pompey's Pillar, Wikipedia. Pompey's Pillar is a Roman triumphal column in Alexandria. This is new to me. Is a triumphal column. You know who Pompey was, right? He was a Roman commander and against Caesar. I'm giving you a timeline. A Roman triumphal column in Alexandria, Egypt. Despite its Roman name, it was actually set up in honor of the Roman Emperor Diocletian almost in 300 AD. It is the only ancient monument in Alexandria that's still standing in its original location. Now, why am I straying off? Now, you see the Egyptian heads there striding it, and there was one right here, and they decided to steal maybe the foundation of one of them or what. Now, why am I off on like this? Now, that's an old photograph, probably before 1900. That's an old drawing, and it shows you the pedestal that it was on was crumbling, which means that they knocked something else down and put this on top of it. This is the first time me looking at it. Somebody decided to climb up there in 1803 and use a telescope from up there. And his name was John South Shortland, Royal Navy. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. We just made a connection. Bombarded in the 1880s by the... Oh, let's go back to the news item. The city was bombarded by the British fleet, RN, Royal Navy, that not registered nurse, and the big shot of that apparently wanted to show off, and he had a telescope, and they managed to get like they use on ships to climb up to the top of the mast, and he was able to climb up there with his telescope, I'm guessing. And that's as far, and then the Crusaders. Did the Crusaders? All right, now the reason why I'm going off on like this is that I believe this was written by something like AI. Because I went back in history to, who was that famous queen that intrigued the Romans when they took over? 600 years before people even knew there was an Arabic language? So the big deal is, the sea is creeping in, and there's a woman, and she's crying because it says from her 9th floor balcony over Alexandria seafront, she watches the sea waves. Now, did you see what was there? A guy's on these big rocks. She's up in a building like this. There's the coastline. All right? And what's happening is coastal erosion is getting underneath those buildings, and some of them are beginning to collapse. And we're supposed to cry, and you see how close it is? Now, go back a little bit. You see this out here? What they're trying to do is, I'm going to show you. There's some kind of citadel here that juts out into the sea. There was probably a lighthouse there. Now, why would I make a guess like that? I suspect that the approach to the Alexandria port is very shallow, and there's a lot of rocks there. And you need to have the lighthouse of Alexandria to keep ships from wrecking, going way back. Now, they claim this is in Alexandria. And we want to look at it like this. Why does it look so different here? You mean they're farming there? These are farmers' fields. There's villages there, but this land here is all farmers' fields, little small plots. And it isn't until you get back further here on the land that's no good, desert, that they actually have villages. Because the stupid thing to do is to plant villages and build cities on arable land. And you can be sure that these plots go all the way back to even before the Greeks. Betcha. Here's the harbor. Do you see? And it goes all the way over to here. And then over here, what's this right here? Port Said. Did I mention Port Said? What city did I say was on the other side of the delta? I've been to Port Said. I met some Egyptian students that were on tour. They had finished high school. They were accepted for university. I was staying at the youth hostel in Port Said. And I was in Port Said, I think, for 2.5 days. I thought I could go there and get a working passage on a ship to India, going this way. But I was naive. You'll notice that right on the other side of the Suez Canal, it's desert. That goes way back thousands of years. I told you this is the Nile Delta, where the fresh water from Ethiopia and Sudan finally is getting ready to hit the coast, and it's very sandy, and it spreads out, and the water table is not very salty, and they're able to grow food there. But if you go a little bit further back, there's rock underneath, and they can't grow anything there, and the water from the Nile doesn't seep sideways. The southern end, there's Ismailia. There's Suez City, which is the southern end of the Suez Canal. And why would I know these things? Because I know about the Israeli-Egyptian wars. And this area right here, what was that called in the Bible? Goshen. You knew that, right? So I've been to Port Said. See, this is how it works. My mind wanders. And there was a group of about 15 young men. They had done something. They were in the youth hostel to stay overnight. Then they were going to travel on. Their bus was outside. And when they found out that I was an American, now this is 1966, they began asking me all kinds of questions, the ones that sort of could speak English. And I was careful to keep my English simple so as many of them as possible could understand what I was answering. And at first they just asked me where I was from and like that, but then they started asking political questions. Why does the American president support the Zionists? And I would give an evasive, simple, stupid answer. Okay? So this went on for about 20 minutes, but then their chaperone, who was an adult in his 40s or early 50s, said, we need to go eat supper. So they left before coming back later to stay overnight. And later I got a chance to talk to their chaperone, the adult person with them. And I said, I enjoyed meeting them, but some of the questions they were asking me, I felt it was very difficult to answer, and I really enjoyed meeting them, but there were some things I didn't feel as though I could talk about. And he's looking me right in the eye, and then he looks up and he says, you're right. You never know who you're talking to. I'm quoting him. You're right. You never know who you're talking to. So after I left the Land Rover people, first I went to Cairo, and then I came back to Alexandria, and then I took a bus by way of Tanta over to Port Said, and then I came back to Alexandria, and then I took a deck class ticket on a passenger ship to Beirut. Now, my mind wanders. So when I was living in Philadelphia, another acquaintance besides the Egyptian-born Venezuelan, now an American Jewish boy, I had another friend at Philadelphia Textile who was an Arab, an Iraqi Arab Muslim, and his family had been in the government, but then, you know, a certain big boy that we fought a war against kicked them out. Well, right about that time, he got on an airplane to go to the United States to learn textiles because he was planning on settling in South America, because he was permitted to leave Iraq rather than being thrown into a political prison for the rest of his life, because he signed an agreement that he would go to an Iraqi embassy every year and he would pay a huge amount of money to get his passport renewed, but the condition of that was that he never in his life would ever attempt to go back to Iraq. I just wanted you to set up what kind of person he was. His sister had been a United Nations ambassador before the overthrow. So he told me how he came to the United States, and he was thrilled about Abdel Gamal Nasser, the president of Egypt, who was the president when I was there. And he landed at the Cairo airport. He fixed his ticket so he would fly from Baghdad to Cairo and then continue on to the United States because he really wanted to visit Egypt and Cairo. And he told me that as he got into a taxi at the Cairo airport and he knew which hotel he wanted to go to, and he told the driver, and they drove into, as they were driving into the city, he was the only passenger sitting in the back seat, and the driver, because they both spoke Arabic, struck up a conversation with him and started asking him the type of questions that I refused to actually talk about in the Port Said Youth Hostel, because this guy I'm talking about told me about his ride from the airport to what happened. So this guy kept asking him all kinds of questions, and he said that he was fully on us, and he would say, I love Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, but I think he could have done this better. I think they should have taken this path rather than this one. And he got into all kinds of answering political questions. Now you have to understand that at that time, under Abdel Gamal Nasser, there were 5 agencies, the equivalent to the FBI, CIA, and all that stuff. And it was to spot anybody who was subversive and anti-revolutionary, and to spy on each other so they couldn't overthrow the government. He got to the hotel, it's early in the day, he got his room, he went up, he opened his bags on the bed, he went back down, he got a taxi out to the pyramids. He loved it. He rode on a camel, he saw the pyramids. He comes back, and when he comes back, he wanted to get his room key from the front desk, and they said, here's a message for you. Call this number. The phone booth's over there. Now, he's only been in Egypt for maybe 3 hours. So he calls, and it turns out that it's a security guy at the Iraqi embassy in Cairo. And the only thing he says to him after saying who he was, you got a big mouth. Such and such Egyptian agency has an arrest warrant for you. I would recommend that you pack your bags and get the first airplane out of Egypt as fast as you can. And he hung up on him. That's all he said to him, and he hung up on him. But given that my Iraqi friend was really politically savvy, so to speak, he hadn't actually taken anything out of his bag. It was open on the bed. He told me he slammed it shut. He grabbed it. He locked the door. He went down to the first desk. He paid as though he was going to stay there. And he went out. He got a taxi, and he got the first airplane going to Crete. Which, in other words, he gave up his airplane ticket on like Trans World Airline or whatever it was, because he knew that if he stayed there any longer, then he would have been arrested and he might never get out. And he eventually found his way to the United States. Now, why am I off on this? I don't know what people from Egypt are like today. I'm giving you some old news from the 1960s and 70s. So that's what the beaches should be like, but they're eroding. And they're having to tear down what was new housing. And I'm looking for the name. Where's the guy's name? Here it is. This is why we see the buildings in Alexandria being eroded from the bottom up. Infiltration of the Mediterranean salty seawater, which it means that possibly the real reason is that the if we were to follow the, now by the way, starting up here, at the northeastern tip of what is Israel, at the Lebanese-Syrian border, which are the headwaters of the Jordan River, the Dan River, which goes into the Sea of Galilee and goes down a rift. The Jordan River is in a rift. That's when the earth separates. And the rift goes down to the Dead Sea, which is way below sea level, but the rift continues down to Aqaba, and this arm, this is the Red Sea, there's Sharm el-Sheikh. That's a continuation of the rift that began at the foot of the Golan Heights, and that rift continues across into Ethiopia, across the bottom of the Red Sea to Ethiopia. So the geology under these bodies of water, I went off to the side, are extremely important. And here is, now you see, do you think that the Nile River is this wide? Let's pick a place right here. Do you think the Nile River is that wide? No. The Nile River is not very wide, but the reason why it's green there is because in that rift from tens of thousands of years ago, the Nile waters from northern Africa have been high enough and enough volume that they infiltrate into the side soils, plus they take water out of the river and they irrigate it, and this is where they grow the food of Egypt, along the Nile. But 95% of Egypt, you can't grow shit. Now remember what I told you about the Nile Delta, and now this is the path of the Nile River, all the way down to ancient Luxor and keep going. And then there's Lake Nasser, and then there's this Aswan Dam, which was controversial in its time, but the Nile River goes even further down into Sudan and Ethiopia and Khartoum, and can you see how it's to Ethiopia, and then there's a big Chinese project that's damming it up there, and there may someday be a war between Egypt and down here if these people cut off all the water to the Nile River. You knew all of that, right? You mentioned, and I mentioned the possibility of war again, and whatever, right? Because this is fresh water that originates 1,000 miles to the south. Okay, now let's get back to the article. This is why we see the buildings in Alexandria being eroded from the bottom up. The flow, remember I said there's a big, big, big Chinese money dam built in Ethiopia that's cutting the flow from the upper Nile down to Egypt. So that means that the fresh water that was protecting the coast at Alexandria and the delta is now receding. after they built the Aswan Dam, they had to be very careful about how much they would allow the water to build up and how much they had to let flow. Well, that's ancient history, right? The Russians built that. Now it's the Chinese building further upstream. And who's making this comment? Ffmpeg. A water scientist at the University of Southern California, who co-wrote the study published in February describing a growing crisis in Alexandria and along the whole coast. Yeah, the Delta. The combination of continuous seawater rises, ground subsidence because of the lack of flow by the Nile, and coastal erosion also having to do with the flows through the sands, arable lands, and all of the various kinds of living life forms that support the structure. Well, you never thought about that, huh? I'm an Aggie. Means Alexandria's coastline has receded an average of 3.5 meters a year over the past 20 years. So when I was there, you had to walk a long distance out to get your toes in the seawater. But now you don't have to. But this guy here, he's somebody named Ffmpeg, a water scientist from the University of California. I thought, well, that's interesting, especially given his name. Jet Propulsion Laboratory, California Institute of Technology, Ffmpeg. Dr. Ffmpeg is a research scientist in the radar science group. Why would he be associated with the radar science? Ground radar? Would that be a part of one of his things he uses to study what's happening under the ground as a hydrologist? Radar science group at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory and a visiting associate in geology at the California Institute of Technology. He obtained his PhD in astronomy in 2002 from the University of Paris in France. He's currently a member of so he's got something to do with the Mars orbiter, and so it sounds like he's a genius. There he is. Excuse me. So I just did a search on him. University of Southern California. There he is. But you're really somebody, unless you wrote it yourself, if you have a Wikipedia article. Now, I'm tracking him down because I discovered quickly, see the NASA stuff? Is an American and French. No, he's scientist of Egyptian descent. It's like the gal down at DMV. She's an American. She grew up here, but she was born in Alexandria. So she's an American of Egyptian descent. She was an A student. Hagee obtained his PhD in astronomy and planetary science in 2002 with distinguished honors from the Paris Sorbonne. Have I ever known somebody got their degree from Sorbonne? Yes. In Paris, his main scientific... I've known people from half the countries of the world. I don't mean shake hands once. His main scientific interests are space and planetary phenomena, planetary geophysics, Mars, the moons, icy satellites, and near-Earth objects. His research involves probing structural, hydrological, and volcanic elements in terrestrial and planetary environments using different types of radar imaging and sounding techniques as well as measuring electromagnetic properties of rocks in the radar frequency range, which is what ground radar is about. It's like nuclear magnetic resonance. It looks at the electrons on hydrogen atoms on various organic structures. It's basically the same thing. It's all called tomography, computed images from non-light sources. You knew that. Radar soundings of aquifers in hyper-arid environments, Egypt. Hagee is a member of the science teams in several planetary explosions. He taught academic classes and mentored several postdocs and graduated students in UCLA, Caltech, Cambridge, Paris, physics global. So he's still got his Trento, which is Italy, and Columbia University. Now we get to his early life. He was born in, wait a minute, he's an Egyptian descent. Hagee was born in 1975 in the city of Tripoli in Libya to an Egyptian family. Whoops. Have I ever been to Tripoli? I told you I have, 1966. So there's Tripoli. You follow the coast, right? Past Sirte and all that. And it's all desert except for the very certain coastal areas, just like Egypt. And then you go down at El Saloum and you, oh wait a minute, we haven't finished yet. There's Tobruk. There's El Saloum, right there, El Saloum, that's Egypt. And then finally after Mersa Matruth and all of that, you get to Alexandria. So they could have driven there in a car because there was a paved over Roman road between Alexandria and Tripoli. You knew that, right? The Italians did it. So let's learn more about him. He was born in 1975 in the city of Tripoli, Libya, but that didn't make him Libyan. If it was 75, that was under Gaddafi, because in 66 when I was in Libya, it was King Idris. 3 years later, Gaddafi's guys overthrew him when he was in Turkey, and they kicked the Americans out of Wheelus Air Base, and they kicked the British out of Tobruk Air Base. In Libya, to an Egyptian family, his father is, now, watch the wording, which is why I started this all together. His father is the Egyptian artist Mohammed Hagee, but there's no link to him. He was raised in Tunisia, Egypt, and France. Now, who was raised in Tunisia, Egypt, and France? Is it the geologist or the father? So the father was in Tripoli probably because he was in trouble in Egypt for some reason. And then he got in trouble under Gaddafi. He'd been there for a while, but he got into, I'm guessing, in trouble under Gaddafi. So they tried Tunisia post-Bourguiba, but that didn't work out, so they went back to Egypt, but then they had to go to France. His father, the family, him. in a family passionate about art in a multicultural environment. You remember the Iraqi guy and how he got into trouble? I'm saying something similar happened with Heggie's family, which is why they had to keep moving around, because his father's mouth was too big. He was too bohemian. He was too multicultural. He was too European. Now I'm going to kick back to my friend from Venezuela that's an Egyptian-born Jew from Venezuela that came to the United States to go to textile college. I want to give you a feeling for what probably happened to Heggie's family. Why they had to leave Egypt and go to France. My Egyptian Jewish friend from Venezuela, his father and his uncle owned an electrical supply company in Alexandria. And with the 1956 war with Israel and then British and French, the Egyptian government came, and because they were Jews, remember a war with Israel, Jews, because they had fought a war with Israel, this is Alexandria, they came to this guy's father's and uncle's business, which was electrical supply, and they padlocked the business and the warehouse because they were Jews. And they told them to get out of the country, or else. Or else. You understand what that means? My friend in Egypt, who was from Alexandria, same story, same time. They didn't know each other. So my friend's family, the ones that owned the business, found an Egyptian who was willing to buy the padlocked business. Theoretically, it had been seized by the government, right? But he bought it because he knew that if he paid the right people in the government, they would just shift the ownership to him, take the padlock off. He bought the business for less than it was worth. But we'll use a round figure that was involved, $1 million. Now they've got $1 million in American dollars, because there's nobody would sell anything in Egypt and a lot of places I've been. Mexico, when I was there, everything was quoted in dollars, not pesos and not in riads and whatever, Egyptian pounds. And then they found a willing Egyptian who said that he would take the $1 million cash, I'm using that as a round figure, give it to him, he puts it in his pocket, and he'll meet them in Paris for 10% of the million. Now, what choice do you have? Seriously, what choice do you have? You give them the $1 million in American dollars. And the Egyptians allow you to leave with just police identity cards and no passports. But because the French were involved in the '56 campaign, they were willing to take those exiled Egyptian Jews. And you know what? When they got to Paris, the Egyptian was there and he handed him the 900,000. And eventually they moved on to Venezuela to start over again in a different business. I'm just telling you what life is like. I'm not making it up. So Hegi was born in the city of Tripoli of Libya to an Egyptian family. His father is, which means he's still alive, an Egyptian artist, Mohammed Hegi. He, presumably the scientist we're talking about, was raised in Tunisia, Egypt, France. You see the French connection? They were in Libya, Gaddafi took over, they had to go to Tunisia. There was some kind of revolution there too, getting rid of Bourguiba. They went back to Egypt. That didn't work either because his father was the kind of person that was running his mouth like my Iraqi friend, so they had to just get out of Egypt and go to France. I'm paralleling it to people who are unrelated to them. I gave you a couple of stories already. Which is why, so Hegi's position on the reform of the educational system in Egypt to support a real transition toward a modern, tolerant, democratic society have been subject to several public discussions after the major changes that followed the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. You remember the guy that I met at the youth hostel in Port Said, that after I apologized for giving really stupid answers that said nothing to his students, he said, "You're right, you never know who you're talking to"? Do you know what his function was with those students? See, I'm coming full circle, and it's no different than this Hegi guy. The reason why they were taking him around to different parts of Egypt before they entered the university was to sort out the politically incorrect ones. But they didn't do it by sitting him down asking him questions. They did it by going around on a tour, and this guy was watching their behavior and their conversation to report back to the security police about every one of them, so that some of them didn't end up going to the University of Cairo in the fall. I'm not making it up. That's what he meant. You never know who you're talking to. He gave it away. He was a government agent. But you wouldn't know that if you hadn't known all those other people. And you wouldn't understand what's happening here if you didn't know all those other people. Hegi is a known public figure among Egyptian youth. He has served as the Egyptian President Advisor for Scientific Affairs. Now, this may be the modern one. There's been a lot of turmoil and then they don't have anything more. Okay? This is an interesting article. He's a big guy in planetary science. He's a genius at this stuff. He's in all these kind of programs here in the United States. And he's heartfelt studying what's happening in Egypt too, and what's happening on the moon, and what's happening on Mars, and blah, 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 blah. But he went to Cairo University. That's the one I was talking about. And then his family had to go to Paris. And he landed, of all places, Southern California. I'm not making fun of him. And as you read this Wikipedia article, I have a feeling that a person didn't write this. I think this was AI written. And I think that as the wording goes on, especially about his early life, the AI fell in love with that kind of mixing up what was attributable to his father and what was attributable to him. So behind the scenes, the early life paragraph is telling you that this genius from Egypt, and I do mean genius. Too bad for Egypt. We've got him. Too bad for Egypt. We've got him. Yeah, he's helping Egypt a little bit, but we've got his brain. Too bad for Egypt. let the Egyptians crawl around the old way. That this paragraph about early life is a political thing, probably written by AI, and nobody really realized what it was doing. Like those other stories I told you. And that's why I've gone through this long thing. I saw that thing about Alexandria. I started reading it. I spotted this guy. Then I see what his background is, and then I'm noticing how this is written, and I'm thinking about people from Egypt, Iraq, and some other places that I've known, that basically it's kind of the same story. But you wouldn't know it if you hadn't met people from back down those times. We've got him. I say we keep him. Steve AB4 Young. Remember, I'm just an idiot running my mouth. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Saying see you in 73.